I'm very sorry to interrupt your coffee break and the good conversations you had. I will try to keep it quite short because you heard a lot about eFTI already today. You heard a lot about eCMR. From our perspective as the Open Logistics Foundation, we see that they both are a very good combination. So it's worth to talk about both, especially in the combination of the two of them. Just as a short introduction, I'm Andreas from the Open Logistics Foundation. We are a non-profit foundation founded in 2021 by some German companies, Renus, Daxa, Schenker, and the Port of Duisburg. We are currently more than 50 industry participants, so this means a lot of other companies joined the Open Logistics Foundation, and our main goal is to bring together competitors so that they agree on standards, on components, and not only do paperwork but also do an implementation, so that in the end we have something like open source components, libraries, full platforms, whatever, which can already be used. So to especially avoid the problem in logistics, everyone has their own platform, everyone has their own data model, and everyone has their own standards, and yet no one can talk to each other. Therefore, we are trying to find the solution, and we think that open source is a good thing. Just that you get an impression, these are our current members. A lot of them are already here today. So we've seen Barry from Pioneera on the stage. So I think it's a good mixture right now between a lot of logistics service providers, but also the IT service providers, which are all needed both for eCMR and for eFTI. The thing, why open source? Because I guess logistics and open source is not the perfect match when you start talking about it, but I guess open source can no longer be avoided. We have some interesting numbers from a colleague from the Harvard Business School, and they made a quite good report, which is also referenced here, about the use and the value of open source. And there is this interesting number of 96% of all the software in the world includes open source. So there is no software which is not linked to open source. I think this is very important to have in mind. Everything what we use today uses open source. And another interesting number, especially if we talk all the time in logistics, we need to become more efficient. We need to avoid cost. They also try to see what would happen if there is no open source in the world of IT. And they came to the conclusion that every kind of software would be 3.5 times more expensive than it is today if there wouldn't be open source components. And this, I think, is quite interesting, especially if we today talk about eFTI and everyone needs to develop something. And I think here are huge efficiency gains for using open source, and also open source, because this is, I would say, the last thing you often hear when someone is not a good friend of open source, that it's only for the private developers who are doing it in their private free time. But just to name some numbers, Microsoft, which I guess is not the typical altruistic company, they are heavily commercially oriented. They are the biggest contributor to open source in the world. So they invest a lot of their own money and resources to develop open source. And Google, Apple, Amazon, they all do the same, and interestingly, they all cooperate on this open source layer. If you take something like Kubernetes, so if you have anything to do with software development, I guess you heard about Kubernetes. This is mainly financed by the big hyperscalers because they understood that we should concentrate on what do we have in common. This we should do together as open source. And where do we differentiate? Of course, this shouldn't be done together. And I think also having eCMR in mind, this is a quite interesting idea. We already said what we try to do is we try to come up with open source components for eCMR, because in the end, the eCMR should replace a document which is currently shared with anyone. It's not, you just have a paper, you hand it over, you get a signature, you take it back. In the digital world, it's not that easy, because if I go to a company, I'm quite sure they can unload the pallet. But if I say I want a digital signature, I'm quite sure they would say, we are not able to do this. We don't understand the document, we don't have the app, we don't have the hardware, whatever. So therefore we see to really implement eCMR, we need to have this kind of de facto standard, which is much more than just the data model, because it's legal document. No, you need to have signatures, you need to stick to the process, you need to comply to the rules of the eCMR regulation. And for that, we came up with this idea of developing standardized components which can be used by everyone. Just as a short history, interestingly, this whole idea of the open source eCMR started in this building, because the first steps were done in a publicly funded project named Silicon Economy, which started in 2022, 2020 is the right thing, because the work on eCMR started after the first year of the project, and quite early. This again is, I think, a big success for a publicly funded project. We identified a lot of industry companies who said this is a good idea and we want to use the results from this publicly funded project. And this was in 2022, where the results of the research project were transferred to the Open Logistics Foundation. So we have a public repository. There companies can collaborate and all the results were transferred, and from there on also the group of industry partners took care of the research results. And in 2023 we had the first pilot together with Renus and DAXA. Again, quite interesting. They are direct competitors, but still they wanted to cooperate here. In the following year, 24, we started to implement EIDAS compliant electronic seals. The seals are also an interesting thing because they are not bound to natural persons. They are bound to companies, which means I'm not, and most of the logistic companies are not interested if a specific person signed an eCMR. They are much more interested that he was allowed to sign in the name of the company. And this is what we try to achieve with the use of electronic seals. And this year, we published a lot of components which are now easily usable, so you can check them out. They are in the repository. They are free to download. We have a clear license which allows everyone to use it for free. There are no links. There is no copy left because we want everyone to use them, or at least to have a look at them, to not reinvent the wheel on eCMR for the 25th time. And of course, the work continues because we are just setting up all those pilot lines and trying to develop it a bit further. The main thing, also not new for you because it's quite compliant to the eFTI architecture, I would say. We agreed on federated platforms, so we are not operating anything. There is no central instance. Anyone can operate a platform. The platforms can communicate, and we just link the platforms. So we also don't care who is using it, and we also don't need to know who is using this solution. So this I think is quite good. As I said, everything was published, and everything here means the data model. This is based on, I need to say, on the UN CEFACT model, but it also includes some things from the IAU template, which are not yet part of the UN CEFACT model. We published an instance. This means there is a front end if you want to use it. It looks a bit like Renus because the developers from Renus developed most of it. So if you like blue and white, this is the right front end for you to use, but still it's easily changeable. It's just there so you can test it out, try it. We have a backend. In the backend, there are those typical functionalities like creating, sharing, signing, validating, whatever. We have two APIs, one API for sharing with other platforms. The other API is the connection to your internal IT, so you can connect your transport management system. This is what Renus did. You can also connect your warehouse management system. This is what currently Blue Yonder is implementing, so that you just can offer, without any big resources, the eCMR service to your existing customers, because the data is already there. In the warehouse management system, everything is already there, which you need for the eCMR. Why not just use it? And as I said, also the advanced electronic seals, the signer and the validator, this we didn't do on ourselves. We collaborated with some experts because all those signing crypto eIDAS compatible stuff is not the easiest thing to take care of. So we connected to a company who's quite famous in this part, and they did the full implementation. Everything is published, so you can just check it out. Therefore, you can see two options. You can either use this fully instance. This means you just deploy the container and you need to connect it to your own IT. You need to create an electronic seal, then it works. Or the other thing, perhaps a bit more interesting, you could, of course, also use all those individual components. So if you say, I already have a platform or I already have an app, I don't want to change the app, you don't need to, because in the end, what the platforms are exchanging is a signed JSON document. And this is the thing which needs to be the same. So it's a signed JSON document signed with the electronic seals. It's linked to each other, so it's a bit like blockchain without blockchain, but it's the same idea of linking 3 different versions to each other so that no one in between can change the data in the documents. So also this is possible. Also there, we have currently some implementations for existing platforms like Collect and Go in the Netherlands, or Editel, who's doing the eCMR for LKW Walter. They are currently trying to use our components in their existing platforms so that they also become compatible. As I said, everything is in the repository. You can just scan the QR code or go on our website. There you'll find any additional information. And now the link to eFTI. I think you all know this. No? eCMR is B2B, eFTI is more for the communication to administration. But I think what's interesting is that both are very complementary, because we need digital information to fulfill the eFTI regulations, and we have them in most of the cases already for the CMR. Today they are sent to a printer, print on paper. If you use the electronic CMR, I think you already have much of the data, or a lot of the data you need for eFTI. So I think now it's the time to connect the existing B2B things like One Record, eCMR, whatever, dangerous goods, and build and find easy, I would call them translators, connectors, however you want to call them, to use the existing information to provide them in the eFTI dataset. And on the other hand, I think also eFTI is very interesting if you're using the eCMR, because today you never know who's stopping you, who's doing the control on the highway, and if they will accept your digital documents. Because there is no strict law which says it needs to look like this and then it will be accepted. It's more like, yeah, it needs to be somehow digital compliant to the paper, whatever this means. And I think if we get eFTI, we get something like a legal compliant solution for all over Europe, which also makes the life for all of the eCMR platforms a lot easier, because you don't need to take care of, okay, this needs to look like this in Germany, or in the Netherlands, it needs to be a bit different, or in Belgium. Belgium is not eCMR, but in Belgium, you need to have a small number in the top right corner or whatever. eFTI will give you a harmonized thing. And I think this will also speed up the digitalization of logistics, because it's already there. You get legally compliant solutions, and you can be sure that it will be accepted if you get into goods control, for example. That's it already. Thanks for your time, and talk to you all later. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now or later.